In a stately three-story house in Dianjiang County, Chongqing City, a somber atmosphere filled the air, accompanied by mournful funeral music and stifled sobs. In the center of the living room, an altar was adorned with a black and white photo of Mrs. Meng Yushou, a kind-hearted woman with a gentle smile, as if she had lived a fulfilled life. But now, at age 55, she had left this world, and the one who ended her life was none other than her daughter-in-law, Zhou Wan. Wu Guoyang, her husband, stood quietly, holding his two sobbing granddaughters in his arms, his tear-filled eyes unable to find words. His son, Wu Zong, looked at his mother's portrait with a gaze heavy with pain and resentment. His young daughter called out, "Daddy," but he responded coldly, "I am not your father. Your grandfather is your father." These paradoxical words, alongside the tragic death of Meng Yushou, raised haunting questions. Why had Wu Guoyang, the grandfather, become the father of these two children? What could the mother-in-law have done to push her daughter-in-law to such a brutal act? Could it be that hidden behind this family were secrets that no one dared to reveal? The arrangement of fate. On a late night on September 17th, 2013, Mrs. Meng Yushou unexpectedly showed up at her sister's house. Mrs. Meng Mingji, with a pale face and swollen eyes. As soon as she entered the living room, she burst into tears and sobbed, "Both of my granddaughters are children of your husband. This truth has weighed heavily on my heart, driving me nearly to madness." Stunned, Meng Mingji looked at her sister, unable to believe what she was hearing. She knew well that Meng Yushou was the most honest and straightforward person in the family. But could such a horrifying act of incest really have occurred? As she listened to her sister's tear-filled account, Mingji began to piece together the bitter truth. This tragic story began with Meng Yushou's son, Wu Zong. After graduating from Chongqing University in 2001, Wu Zong quickly joined the family's building materials business. He was a healthy young man from a prosperous family, once the ideal of many young women. But fate took a cruel turn in January 2003, when Wu Zong was in a horrific car accident. Though he narrowly escaped death, the accident left him with severe brain trauma, causing him to suffer from epilepsy. From being a future pillar of the family, he became a burden, plagued by sudden seizures and a complete change in personality. Despite her son's unfortunate situation, Mrs. Meng Yushou was determined to find him a decent wife. Yet, those who once considered arranging a match for him now kept their distance. 5 years passed, and Wu Zong remained unmarried. Wu Guoyang advised his wife to accept that their son would live with them until the end of their days. But Meng Yushou was resolute. She could not let go of her fear that the Wu family line would end without an heir. For her, that was simply unacceptable. From that day forward, Meng Yushou's criteria for a daughter-in-law changed completely. She no longer sought a woman from a well-educated or well-bred background. All she needed was someone who was healthy and could bear children, to prevent the Wu family from ending without descendants. In the winter of 2008, a friend introduced her to Zhou Wan, a waitress at the family's regular restaurant. Zhou Wan, born in 1990, came from a poor rural area in Dianjiang County. With her gentle demeanor and modest background, she seemed to Meng Yushou like the perfect match. Zhou Wan's family situation was indeed challenging. Her mother suffered from ankylosing spondylitis. Her father had passed away 2 years earlier, and her 2 younger brothers were still in school. As the sole breadwinner, Zhou Wan carried the responsibility of supporting her family and urgently needed a large sum to cover her mother's treatment and her brother's school fees. Recognizing the ideal opportunity, Meng Yushou was convinced that, with financial assistance, Zhou Wan would comply with her wishes. Upon meeting her, Meng Yushou promised to cover her mother's medical expenses and her brother's tuition until they graduated if Zhou Wan would agree to marry Wu Zong. Despite her reservations, Zhou Wan requested to meet Wu Zong before making a decision. The following day, Meng Yuxiu brought her son to the restaurant to meet Zhou Wan. Throughout the meeting, Wu Zong remained mostly silent, focusing on picking up food for Zhou Wan. Though his gestures were limited, his attentiveness reassured Zhou Wan somewhat, making her think that perhaps his condition wasn't as severe as it seemed. Facing her family's financial pressures and Meng Yuxiu's promises, Zhou Wan agreed to the marriage. During the Lunar New Year of 2009, Zhou Wan and Wu Zong officially became husband and wife. However, their wedding night turned into a nightmare when Wu Zong's epilepsy suddenly flared up. Just as they were about to become intimate, he made a strange sound and collapsed from the bed, lying rigid on the floor, his mouth foaming and his body convulsing violently. Hearing the commotion, her parents-in-law rushed in but displayed surprising calm at the sight. One held open Wu Zong's mouth to place a cloth in it, while the other pressed acupoints to ease the convulsions. Zhou Wan's first night with her husband ended in terror and despair. She slept alone in the reading room, calling her best friend to pour out her heart. Her friend advised her to get a divorce immediately, and at that moment, Zhou Wan also felt there was nothing left to hold on to. The next morning, Meng Yuxiu met with Zhou Wan privately, silently handed her 20,000 yuan, and suggested she go back to her mother's home to rest for a while. After some contemplation, Zhou Wan took the money and returned to her hometown. Upon her return to the Wu household, Meng Yuxiu took her hand, gently reassuring her. Modern medicine has advanced greatly. Surely, they can cure Wu Zong. Just be patient a little longer. If you have a child, the entire Wu family's estate will belong to you. Though encouraged by these words, since the wedding night, Wu Zong had become extremely hesitant to be intimate with his wife. Fearing her plan to secure an heir was in jeopardy, Meng Yuxiu suggested a strategy. Take the initiative to get close. He'll get used to it gradually, and everything will work out. Zhou Wan tried repeatedly, but each time she was either pushed away by Wu Zong or met with no reaction at all. With every failed attempt, her hope diminished, and her dream of a peaceful family turned into a burden laden with pressure. The mother-in-law's bold artificial insemination plan. Days went by, and when all hope seemed to fade, Meng Yuxiu refused to accept it. Although Wu Guoyang suggested they consider adoption, she firmly declined. If we could adopt, why bother marrying a daughter-in-law? She retorted, determined. The desire to preserve the family line had rooted deeply in her mind. Thus, she began to consider the possibility of IVF and silently planned to convince Zhou Wan to agree. Using her cunning, Meng Yuxiu carefully built trust, personally teaching Zhou Wan how to manage the company's finances, giving her authority and autonomy, and turning her into an essential partner in the family business. After 3 months, her efforts paid off when Zhou Wan finally agreed to try artificial insemination. In June 2009, Meng Yuxiu took both Wu Zong and Zhou Wan to the hospital for examinations. But her hopes were quickly dashed when the doctor informed her that Wu Zong's epilepsy had a high hereditary risk. Moreover, the long-term medications he took had significantly lowered the quality of his sperm, making him unsuitable for IVF. Meng Yuxiu couldn't hold back her tears, sobbing in utter despair. The Wu family will be extinct. What karma have I created to suffer this? Though Wu Guoyang tried to comfort her, urging her to accept fate, Meng Yuxiu remained relentless in her search for a solution. One day, in the depths of her despair, a bold idea struck her. She proposed that her husband, Wu Guoyang, donate his sperm so that her daughter-in-law could undergo IVF, with the hope of securing an heir for the Wu family. Wu Guoyang initially opposed the idea vehemently, viewing it as an act against moral principles. But Meng Yuxiu's tears and pleading wore him down, and he reluctantly agreed, on the condition that Zhou Wan also agreed. When Zhou Wan heard this proposal from her mother-in-law, she said nothing. She quietly packed her things and returned to her mother's home in silence. But Meng Yuxiu was not one to give up. The next morning, She went to Zhou Wan's house herself. She took attentive care of Zhou Wan's mother, helping her turn over, bathe, and even arranged a celebration for Zhou Wan's younger brother, who was about to start university, at the most upscale restaurant in town. Before leaving, she left another 20,000 yuan for his tuition. These gestures gradually softened Zhou Wan, and finally, she agreed. Meng Yuxiu's joy was overwhelming. She continually reassured her husband and daughter-in-law, "This was my idea. If anyone should feel ashamed, it's me. You two are doing this to bring merit to the Wu family. The ancestors will certainly be grateful." By the end of August 2009, the family went together to a fertility clinic in Chongqing. According to regulations, the hospital had to carefully check marriage certificates before collecting sperm and eggs. However, Meng Yuxiu secretly paid the clinic to collude with her, allowing her husband to substitute for her son in the sperm collection process. Finally, in November, Zhou Wan successfully conceived. Zhou Wan, a puppet in the Wu family. From the moment Zhou Wan became pregnant, Meng Yuxiu became more caring than ever. She not only hired a housemaid, but also personally took meticulous care of her daughter-in-law, thrilled to see everything unfolding according to plan. Yet deep down, she harbored silent worries. She knew that having Zhou Wan carry her father-in-law's child was an extreme and morally questionable choice. Her greatest fear was that a bond might develop between Wu Guoyang and her daughter-in-law, complicating matters even further. To prevent this, she bluntly warned her husband to maintain a respectful distance from Zhou Wan. At the same time, she made future plans. After the child was born, she would arrange for Wu Zong and Zhou Wan to move into a separate house to lead an independent life. In August 2010, Zhou Wan gave birth to a baby girl and officially became a mother. While Meng Yuxiu should have felt content with an heir, she couldn't help feeling disappointed. Deep down, she still yearned for a grandson to carry on the Wu family name perfectly, knowing that the clinic still stored 3 fertilized embryos and could perform insemination within 5 years. Meng Yuxiu began gently persuading Zhou Wan to try for another pregnancy. In August 2011, a year later, Zhou Wan finally agreed to her mother-in-law's suggestion. Hearing that IVF could potentially allow for gender selection, Meng Yuxiu visited the hospital to inquire. However, the doctor explained that the primary purpose of IVF was to address fertility issues, and gender selection depended on luck unless there was a specific medical reason. Even though she was willing to pay extra, the hospital refused her request. In July 2012, Zhou Wan gave birth to another baby girl. Unlike the initial joy she felt, Meng Yuxiu showed clear disappointment this time. From a doting mother-in-law, she gradually grew distant. When the child turned 1 month old, she dismissed the housemaid and requested that Wu Zong and Zhou Wan move to a different house, leaving the full responsibility of childcare on Zhou Wan. Wu Guoyang suggested hiring help to lighten the burden on his daughter-in-law, but Meng Yuxiu dismissed the idea, saying, "She's just a country girl. What hardship can't she handle?" Nonetheless, Wu Guoyang secretly bought quality food and occasionally sent it to their house, hoping to alleviate some of the challenges Zhou Wan faced. Unexpectedly, Wu Zong reported to his mother that his father often visited their home, bringing good food for the grandchildren and assisting Zhou Wan. Hearing this, Meng Yuxiu grew furious and immediately demanded that Wu Zong, Zhou Wan, and the children move back to the family home, putting an end to any private contact between Wu Guoyang and her daughter-in-law. The lingering tensions in the Wu family. Back under the same roof, Wu Zong continued to have frequent epileptic episodes and odd behavior, causing his children to grow increasingly distant from him. Their grandmother's temper was quick, and her frequent scolding didn't endear her to them. The only person they loved outside of their mother was their grandfather, Wu Guoyang. After work, he always made time to play with the children and sometimes took them on walks around town with their mother. Despite Meng Yuxiu's efforts to restrict him, Wu Guoyang continued to find ways to care for his granddaughters and shower them with affection. Day by day, Meng Yuxiu's jealousy and obsessive control began to erode the family atmosphere. She couldn't stand the fact that her granddaughters felt closer to Wu Guoyang than to their own father. Once again, she warned her husband, "You're just the sperm donor. The children should be close to our son, not you." Wu Guoyang could only sigh and respond, "I only act as a grandfather in front of them." But his explanation did little to ease her suspicions. As time went on, Meng Yuxiu's control became increasingly oppressive, especially towards Zhou Wan. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something inappropriate between Wu Guoyang and her daughter-in-law, which kept her on high alert. By the Lunar New Year of 2013, Zhou Wan found herself thinking, "My mother-in-law wants us all under her complete control. At first, I thought she disliked girls, which is why she forbade my father-in-law from bonding with the grandchildren. But later, I realized the real reason. She feared there was a special bond between me and him to ease the tension with his wife." Wu Guoyang decided to move into the company's quarters after the Lunar New Year in 2013, only returning home on weekends and holidays. His absence made his two granddaughters miss him even more. The older granddaughter asked to call him every day, while the younger one, despite only seeing him once a week, ran up happily to be held each time he came home. Although Meng Yuxiu couldn't stop her grandchildren's affection for their grandfather, she increased her vigilance, ensuring that her daughter-in-law had no private moments with her husband. On September 17, 2013, Meng Yuxiu confided to her sister, "Meng Mingji, every time my husband comes home, Zhou Wan is well-groomed, but normally, she doesn't smile even once. Once, I went out to buy vegetables, but halfway there, I realized I forgot my wallet. When I returned, I saw Zhou Wan breastfeeding, and my husband was sitting beside her, holding the older granddaughter. The moment I entered, Zhou Wan quickly adjusted her clothes and ran upstairs with the baby, while my husband awkwardly said he hadn't seen anything." Hearing her sister's tearful recount, Meng Mingji decided to visit the Wu household to see for herself. Upon arrival, she witnessed Wu Guoyang and Zhou Wan playing joyfully with the grandchildren. In a fit of rage, Meng Mingji stormed over and slapped Zhou Wan. Considering it a warning, Wu Guoyang immediately intervened, swearing that he had never behaved inappropriately with his daughter-in-law. However, from that day on, the seeds of tragedy were planted in Zhou Wan's heart. Later, when the tragedy unfolded, Meng Mingji was racked with guilt, blaming herself, "If I hadn't struck Zhou Wan that day, maybe things wouldn't have escalated to the point where she killed her own sister-in-law." The desire for freedom and crime born of desperation. One afternoon in September 2013, the older granddaughter pulled her grandfather to play, holding her mother's hand. Meng Yuxiu, standing nearby, initially coughed to get their attention, but when they didn't respond, she angrily shouted, "My son, Wu Zong, is still alive, yet here you are, openly behaving like this." Her words caused Zhou Wan's face to change, and she replied, "Mother, please don't say things like that in front of the children. It's really inappropriate." Wu Guoyang also interjected, "You are their grandmother, and they love and respect you. But what you're saying is truly unkind." The following morning, in a fit of uncontrollable rage, Meng Yuxiu decided to leave the family home. Before leaving, she cast a cold look at Zhou Wan and Wu Guoyang, delivering a bitter warning. "If you're not afraid of divine retribution, then go ahead and marry each other." Her words struck Zhou Wan like a knife, leaving her utterly devastated, unable to bear the humiliation and oppression. She broke down in tears, demanding an immediate divorce from Wu Zong. Ironically, this time, the person who had once supported her decision to divorce, Wu Guoyang, tried to dissuade her. "If you divorce, the children will suffer. They won't be happy." whether they stay here or go with you. Bear it a little longer. Your mother-in-law is just angry right now." Persuaded by her father-in-law's words, Joanne reluctantly set aside her plan to divorce. The next morning, at his suggestion, she agreed to accompany him to bring her mother-in-law home, hoping for a reconciliation. But when they arrived, Meng Yuxiu greeted them with uncontrollable fury, screaming, "Shameless lovers! Are you planning to sleep together right in front of me?" Her cruel words made Wu Guoyang turn away immediately. Yet Meng Yuxiu did not stop. She rushed outside, shouting, "Everyone, listen! My daughter-in-law, Joanne, is seducing my husband. She's trying to take both men in our household." This public humiliation ignited a storm of anger in Joanne. She had endured being controlled and manipulated, but now she faced slander so vicious she could no longer bear it. Overwhelmed by fury and despair, she stormed back into the house, forcefully pushing her mother-in-law inside and slamming the door shut. Pushed to the edge of madness, Joanne entered a room, took a knife from the wardrobe, and walked toward her mother-in-law. Her eyes were devoid of emotion as she raised the knife in a surge of uncontrollable rage. Meng Yuxiu, terrified, ran to the third floor, but Joanne followed, locking the door behind her, giving no chance for escape. Cornering her mother-in-law, she stabbed her repeatedly in the neck, chest, and stomach until Meng Yuxiu collapsed, lifeless on the floor. The case ended in a tragic loss for both families. In February 2014, the Chongqing Intermediate People's Court sentenced Zhou Wan to 12 years in prison for premeditated murder. On September 21, 2014, speaking from prison, Zhou Wan tearfully expressed her regret and resentment. "I was just a puppet controlled by my mother-in-law. From marriage to having children, I never had a say in my life. I'm just an ordinary woman who wanted love and a decent life. But because of her, I lost the chance to live like any normal woman." The costly lesson behind the case. Was all of this entirely Meng Yuxiu's fault? She was a stubborn woman, believing she could control everything to keep her family together as she wished. But ultimately, reality spun out of her grasp, leaving her no time for regret. As for Joanne, she initially accepted being bound and controlled out of financial need and a sense of security. But when repressed anger had built up for too long, it exploded beyond limits, transforming her into a criminal in a moment of uncontrollable rage. The tragic story of the Wu family is a stark reminder of the unforeseeable consequences of control and selfishness. The continuation of the family line, a duty often considered noble and a source of happiness, became the cause of tragedy due to the blind imposition of expectations within this family. Meng Yuxiu, driven by a fervent desire for an heir, orchestrated a marriage between her ailing son and her daughter-in-law. To achieve her goal, she even pressured her husband to donate sperm for artificial insemination, step by step binding everyone to a life filled with pressure and inescapable constraints. Meng Yuxiu's obsessive control and extreme determination exceeded limits, creating a suffocating atmosphere of unending conflict in the family. Joanne, an unfortunate daughter-in-law, endured overwhelming pressure and control from her mother-in-law, losing her ability to make choices about her own life. She had no freedom to choose or to live as she wished. This repression and resentment ultimately pushed Joanne to the brink, transforming her into a person capable of an unforgivable crime. The Wu family's tragedy offers a profound lesson on the importance of respect, understanding, and love within a family. Each member has the right to live their own life, to make free choices, and to make their own decisions. When selfishness and control overshadow love, the happiness of a family is threatened and ultimately shattered. Meng Yuxiu believed that by controlling her family, she could hold it together. In reality, she only hurt those she loved, pushing them into irreparable conflicts and tragedy. What do you think about today's case? Share your thoughts in the comments below to join the discussion. Don't forget to like, subscribe to Decoder Box so you won't miss more thrilling cases from around the world. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.